Guys, we'll discuss a new concept from React in this video, and this concept is component lifecycle. We'll be covering the different phases of component lifecycle and the first phase of lifecycle in this video. Now, what is this component lifecycle? It involves all the phases. It talks about all the phases component goes through. From its birth till death. Here the word birth and death are used because you see in the heading it is connected with life. So it is the life cycle. Life cycle is involved with birth and death, and here birth refers to the creation of component and death refers when it is destroyed. Now there are different phases through which the component goes throughout its life cycle, and these phases are mounting, updating, unmounting, and error handling. Now let me explain you these words. So mounting refers to it is a technical word. It refers to the point when component is added to the DOM. Then updating means when there is any change in state or props of a component, then the component is re-rendered, so it comes under updating phase. Now unmounting is that point when the component is removed from the DOM, and error handling is that phase when the error comes while the component is loading, rendering. And the component lifecycle goes through these four phases in the order in which they are written. Now we'll talk about the first phase, that is mounting. And each of these phases are involved with several methods which are called in order during these phases. So I am writing a component lifecycle methods. There are certain methods which are called, and these methods are specific to each phase. Now there are four methods which are called in mounting phase. The first one is constructor. The second one is static get derived state from props, and the third one is render function, and the fourth function is component did mount. Component did mount. And these methods are called in the order they are written. First the constructor is called, then this static get derived state from props is called, then render function is called, then at the last a component did mount is called when the component is mounted. As its name suggests, when the component is mounted, then this component did mount function is called. And you must probably know that these two function, the render function is called when there is any change made in the state using set state function, and whenever this render function is called, before render function always this static get derived state from props is called, both in mounting phase and in updating phase. In updating phase also render function is called. So whenever render function is called, this function get derived state from props is always called, and it is a rarely used function. There is a very few cases when this function is used, And let me explain about these functions. The constructor is called when the component is created to initialize the state, and this get derived state from props is called whenever there is a chance of changing in state from props, then we use this function, and it is called if it is explicitly present. And we know that render function is called to render the component. Here we return the JSX which we want to render, and at last this component it mount is called. Here we do all our side effects action, and here we can also change our state using get set state function. And now let's move on to the code part, and we'll see through code how these functions are called. This is the React app which I have just created using create React app, and I have deleted all the unnecessary files which I am not going to use, and kept only these two files which are app.js and index.js. From index.js I am rendering this app component, and currently it is empty. I have deleted all its content, and what I am going to do here, I am going to create two components in this React app, and I will show how these four component lifecycle methods which I have discussed in mounting phase, in which order they are rendered. I will create two components, and in these two components I will create these four functions, and obviously these two components will be class components. Now let's create. In the source folder I am creating again a new folder, and I am naming it as components. Inside this folder I am going to create two components. First one I will name as component A, and I have to rename it as it is going to be a JavaScript file. Again a new component, component b.js. Now let's write the content of component A. It will be a class component, so we'll start with class and its name component A, and it will extend as always component. And you can see that VS Code has already wrote import statement for me, and now I will define constructor function. And you must have probably known that constructor function always call the super function, and there are two purposes here for calling super function. And the first one is that it initializes the constructor function of the base class, and the second purpose is that will be not be able to use this keyword here until we call super function. And after calling super function, let's create the next function, which is static and get derived state from props. And the next one was render function, and at last method was component it mount. So these are the four methods which we have already discussed, and I'll put console statements in all these four methods to see in which order they are called. So console.log, and I will write the name of the function in which it is written, constructor here, and similarly I will change and I will write get derived state from props here. And here I will write render, and here I will write component mount. And I will also write the name of the component because we have two components. And here I am going to use multi-cursor functionality given by VS Code. And before that I have created a space here. Now I will create multi-cursors and I will write the component name, which is component A, and after that I will add called. Now it makes sense, constructor component is called and get derived state from props component is called. So we'll have the function name then component name, so we can understand this method from which component is called. Similarly I will write for component B, and here I will export this component by default export default component A, like this. Alright, I'm copying here and I will paste it in component B, but I have written all these already in component B, so I will paste it in component A. Copying from here, pasting here. What happened? Copied, pasting. All right, so it is correct for component A. Now let's make changes in the component B. First of all, its spelling is incorrect. Let's correct it. Component, now it seems to be correct. Now I'll find all the occurrences of component A and replace it with component B already filled. So there are 6 occurrences. I will change all of them. Now I have successfully created component B also. So these two components are not rendered till now. I have to render them in app.js. And for rendering purpose I have to import component A. I'm going to render only component A here. So import component A, and rest of the thing is already filled by VS Code. Now I will use a functional component to create this component, and inside this I will simply return component A. Alright, and I will export this function also, export default. Okay, now let's make component B as child component for this function, like this. Return component B, and for that purpose I have to import it also. Import component B, yes. And for displaying purpose I am rendering something from here, some text from here. Return, and let's print h3. This is component B, like this, and I think we are done. Let's see if we have not made any mistake, then it should show us the output. Let's run it. npm start. It is starting and there is some problem. Component B is not defined. In which file? Component A. Let's correct it. Okay, so this C should be capital. Now let's see. Yes, it is rendering, which is as expected, but our concern is in console. Some warnings. Let's first clear the console, then again reload it. Now you can see, but you can see that each console is printed 2 times. Why? Because in strict mode the component is rendered 2 times. Let's remove this strict mode, then see. I'm clearing the console, then reloading, and then see. Now only one message for constructor component is called, but there is some warning. You see, I can remove this warning. Valid state must a valid state or object must be returned from this function get derived state from props. So it always returns something, so it is giving us warning. So we don't have anything to return, so I'm returning null from here, and from this component P also I'm returning null to emulate the warning. Yes, that warning is gone, but we are remaining with some other warning, and it is saying that initial state is undefined from component A, and that is not recommended. Okay, so it is saying that in this constructor there should be some initial state should be defined. Let's define some empty state like this dot state like this, and we'll do similar thing here also. Now there should not be any warning. We have done any mistake. Okay, here I have written it in the wrong method. I have to write it in constructor function like this. Yes, now it is working. Now after clearing the console, I've reloaded, and we can see that clearly. Constructor first, the constructor of component A is called, then get derived state from props component A is called, then render function of component A is called as expected. But the interesting thing starts from here is that now instead of component did mount from calling, the constructor component from B is called. So it happens that component did mount of any function is called at last until all of its child components are rendered. So similarly all the methods from component B will be called, then at last component did mount of A will be called. So similarly, see, constructor of B is called, then get derived state from B is called, then render function from B is called, then component did mount of B is also called. So all the 4 methods of B is called, then B is mounted, then after that at last the parent component A is mounted. So I want to show you this order. Now you must have understood that while rendering 2 components, first all the child components must be mounted, then only parent component is mounted at last. And you have already seen the order in which these methods are called. These methods are called in this order in which they are written here. And in update state also this render function is called, and whenever render function is called, whether it is in mounting state phase or whether it is in update phase, get derived state from props is always called before render function. Alright, now you must have understood about the life cycle of the component. If you find this video helpful, please consider subscribing my channel. Thank you. We'll meet in the next video.